Washington has always been known as a no income tax state, but if you're thinking about relocating to Seattle, that situation is a bit more fluid currently because Washington just passed what's commonly known as the Millionaire tax. It's a 9.9% income tax on households earning more than $1 million annually, and it's scheduled to begin in 2028 with payments due starting in 2029. But here's the part that matters for relocation. The situation isn't fully settled yet. The tax is technically law today, but a referendum to block it was recently blocked in the Supreme Court, but the initiative efforts are still active. So this means that voters could still play a pivotal role in deciding the outcome of this if it comes to a vote potentially later this year in 2026. So this video is not about whether the tax is good or bad. This is a video specifically for those that are considering relocating to Seattle and just want to understand whether this could potentially be something that they need to consider as part of that move. For most buyers, this probably won't affect most of their tax bills. However, it still could play a role in the economics of the region, housing costs, inflation, values, and things that could still potentially be important in the conversation when you're thinking about moving here. So if you're considering to move to the Seattle area and still have questions after watching this video, I'm a local real estate broker and I love helping people make the move to this area. Feel free to reach out. My contact info is below in the details, and I look forward to chatting. And on that note, I will say, while I am a licensed real estate broker, I'm not a CPA, a tax attorney, or an accountant. So if this could potentially affect your situation, make sure you consult a professional that deals in those areas. So let's start with the basic question. What is the Millionaire tax? The basic version is this. Washington State passed a new law that taxes earnings over $1 million annually. And the key part is over $1 million. So that doesn't mean that 9.9% is taxed on every dollar that you earn. It essentially would start applying after you're above that threshold. So even though this change might not affect everybody, policy uncertainty can still affect things like buyer confidence, long-term planning, and how people compare Washington against other states that they could potentially move to when they're making that decision. And this timeline is important because this isn't going to affect the housing market right away. But relocation is a long-term decision, so things that could impact the area 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now suddenly become relevant. Historically, Washington State has always been known to not have an income tax or a state income tax, but if that perception starts to shift, it could change buyers' evaluation of this area for the long term. And that's why it's such a big topic right now. But here's where the situation becomes a little bit more interesting. The tax has been signed into law, but that doesn't mean that it's finalized. There's two tracks that you would want to pay attention to. The first is the legal track. There was an attempt to challenge the tax through a referendum that ultimately got blocked by the state Supreme Court. So that track didn't make it through. That doesn't mean the conversation is over because there's other avenues that could take place that could involve the public and a vote on this specific issue. That brings us to the second track, which is the ballot and initiative track. Even though the referendum route was blocked, the initiative and ballot track is still very much active. So what that means is voters could still be part of the conversation if an initiative passes and becomes a ballot issue. So I just want to emphasize that it could potentially go to voters, but it should not be treated as such until it officially qualifies. So this is still very much a fluid situation. No firm outcome has actually been decided, so it's something that we'll have to pay attention to and see as time goes on. So for relocation buyers, the question shouldn't be, what does this tax decision mean for me right now? It becomes more of a long-term question of what could this potentially mean for Washington's cost of living, property values, and other things that directly affect real estate. And it's not just this issue alone, because people are also looking at cost of housing, commute, lifestyle, quality of life, job and economic opportunities, and climate as well. So taxes are only one part of the conversation, but they can still influence perception, and that perception can have a measurable impact on real estate as well. So the key thing to know is that this doesn't automatically make Seattle unattractive. The area still has a lot going for it. That's a strong local economy, great geography, access to nature, strong income potential, a lifestyle that a lot of people still want. But the tax conversation could impact how people evaluate the area as a whole when they're making that decision. Some people will still move without hesitation. Others might take a wait and see approach. And this might also cause some people that were seriously considering the area to compare areas in other states. One potential outcome directly related to the real estate market here is upper market real estate buyers might take a wait and see approach. They might wait longer, they might negotiate harder, and that shift could affect certain price points. And it may also influence days on market and seller expectations. It would be a little bit oversimplified to say that this tax alone can cause the entire market to shift. The Seattle market's already affected by multiple different factors. It's really a combination of things like mortgage rates, inventory levels, buyer confidence, market liquidity, and just the overall cost of ownership here. So if the market does soften, it's not going to be solely because of this one issue. It's simply just going to be another variable that gets added to the mix that people are going to have to consider when they're thinking about moving here. And because it's based on a variable of many different things, the market here has already been shifting. What we're seeing is growing inventory, longer days on market, and buyers actually have more options than they've had in years past when the market was super competitive and homes were only staying on for a couple of days. So the whole situation has shifted in general in the Seattle area. And this is why I always tell people that are relocating here to solely focus on the housing market by itself. This price is one piece of the decision. Monthly payment, property taxes, commute patterns, sale considerations, and cost of ownership all need to be part of that. If you are going back and forth on all of those different factors, me and my team help people relocate to this area all the time, and we know the market really well here. So let's jump into the two opposing arguments that are at the center of this whole thing. Supporters of the tax argue that historically, Washington's tax system has relied on other areas of income, like sales tax, property tax, and other areas of tax that can hit lower or middle income households. From that perspective, a tax on the highest earners would bring in more revenue while also not affecting the majority of households in the state. On the other side of the coin, critics argue that higher income taxpayers are more mobile than before, and their concern is not necessarily that everyone's going to leave all at once. It just means that this could directly impact a lot of their high-level decision making. So that might mean delaying a move, possibly moving to another state, or they might just structure their household and finances a little bit differently in response to this. And so for the relocation aspect, you don't have to pick a side to understand why this matters. Sides focused on tax fairness and revenue. The other side is focused on competitiveness, mobility, and long-term confidence in the state. So both arguments actually matter if you're trying to understand how Washington is going to be perceived by people comparing it against other states as it relates to a potential move. So what does the research say? The honest answer is that it's actually mixed right now. One study I would reference is the 2016 American Sociological Review study called Millionaire Migration and the Taxation of the Elite. The study essentially found that millionaire tax flight does occur, but it doesn't happen in the mass form that some people would expect. It usually just happens on the margins. So in plain English, taxes can definitely influence behavior, but the idea that it causes a mass exodus is potentially unrealistic to expect. Also, research showing that the very top end of the wealthy spectrum are more influenced by state estate taxes than necessarily state income taxes. There was a 2023 study done by the American Economic Journal paper that explored this. And I would be careful not to over-apply that because state income taxes and state estate taxes are two completely different things. But it does support the point that the sensitivity is more likely to occur at the very upper echelons of the market. So what should you actually take away from this? Well, the first is don't panic. This isn't a crash prediction. And second, don't overstate it. Most buyers are not directly affected by this tax as it stands right now. But the third is don't ignore it either. Right now, Washington's tax situation is changing. It might impact how some people think about relocating here, especially at higher price points. And lastly, separate the tax side of the conversation with the real estate side of the conversation. So for tax questions, talk to a tax professional. For housing questions, Talk with a realtor who knows the market. Ask questions like, are you buying for the short term or are you buying for the long term? Would you still choose the area if the tax policy significantly changed? And are you comfortable with the full cost of ownership here? So those are going to be examples of real relocation questions, not just, do I move here because of this new tax or not? So I'm hoping that these insights have given you some value. If you still have questions about the housing market here, what's going on in the area, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help where I can, and looking forward to chatting.